On just a couple things about today's program. First of all, I am going to be sending out a PDF copy of the slides tomorrow afternoon. So if you are taking notes, no problem, feel free to do that. But just know that all of this information, including all of the links and everything like that, will be sent to you in that PDF tomorrow. And you'll also have my email address. So if you need to ask any questions, you can always do it that way. And speaking of questions, please do hold your questions to the end of the presentation. If we have time, you will be able to unmute yourself. In the meantime, I will be periodically opening up the chat. It will be closed for the majority of the presentation. But yeah, I'll let you know when it's open, and then you can set, you can send your questions off and I will answer those. But yeah, welcome to Introduction to Podcasting. This is just going to be a very brief, but hopefully a good overview of what you need to know to get into podcasting, as well as pointing you towards a lot of resources that the library provides completely for free that can really help you get on your way with this topic. So let's get started with a very simple question, which is, what is a podcast? Sometimes people don't know when they join these programs exactly what we're talking about, but if you're not familiar with it, a podcast is essentially a digital audio file made available on the internet for downloading to a computer or a mobile device, typically available as a series, new installments of which can be received by subscribers automatically. And that's just a very boring way of saying they're like cool radio programs essentially that you can download and listen to wherever and whenever you want. And most people now are pretty familiar with what podcasts are. Even in the years since I first created this program, they have grown in importance. More and more people are aware of podcasting, and more people are getting into it, whether it's listening or creating their very own. And again, the focus of this particular presentation is creating your own podcasts. But there are also a lot of really awesome ones out there to listen to. I can almost guarantee you, no matter what subject you are interested in, someone is podcasting about it. So why podcast? Well, for starters, 144 million Americans listen to podcasts. This is a very influential media form. It's fairly new, but people really, really love it. And not only that, but the number of people who are listening to podcasts has been growing pretty steadily over the past years. So we've got, an upward trend, which is pretty good. So yeah, keep this in mind. Like if you have a story to tell or some interest you want to share with the world, podcasting is actually a pretty great way to get an audience. It's fairly simple to do. It can have a very low cost to creating this kind of thing. There will be some cost, and we'll talk about that later on, but it doesn't have to be that expensive. So it's a really great way to create a piece of media to share with the world. So, like I said, I'm going to be talking a lot about different resources that you can use to help you with podcasting. And these are all library resources. They are all completely free. And we'll just periodically be looking at different ones. So the very first resource that I'm going to talk about is a class that I took several years ago when I created this program called Blogging and Podcasting for Beginners. And blogging, we're not really going to go into blogging too much, but the two are related. Often, if you have a podcast, you will have a blog of some kind where you put up any supplemental materials, maybe some images of things you talked about in your podcast, maybe a link to where you can get the podcast itself. So just keep it in the back of your mind that if you do end up creating a podcast, you may also create a blog. And this particular course is really great for that. Because yeah, it's going to show you how to create a blog, picking your software, And then it also goes into preparing, recording, editing, and publishing a podcast, and even has a section on video podcasting. We're primarily focusing on audio podcasting today. That is normally what people think when they think of podcasting. You can create a video as well. And I mean, that's not a problem, but we really won't be talking too much about that. So if that's something you're interested in, this is definitely a course to take a look at. And this course, you can kind of see on the left-hand side of the screen, is on a platform called Gale Courses. So I'm going to take a quick break from the presentation and show you guys where Gale Courses is on the library website and how you can use it. So here we go, County Library website. Just to let you know, every single resource I talk about today, you will need a library card for. If by any chance you do not have a library card, you can always get one by going to using the library, selecting virtual branch, and then selecting apply for an online library card. That number will work for any of the resources I'm talking about today. But if you already have a card, you're good to go. You just want to get into Gale Courses, you can go to using the library and then to e-courses. This is pretty much, I think, the only thing we're going to be looking at today are several different e-courses. E-courses are free classes that the library offers. They're all through a third party. So just so you know, no library staff are teaching these or creating them, but they are really phenomenal. And we've got Gale Courses right up here at the top. Gale Courses is actually one of my favorites, and that is because you can kind of see here, it is interactive and instructor-led. And what's that mean? Well, interactive means that you can participate in activities. You can actually participate on a discussion board, which is really, really nice. And so on the discussion board, you can get feedback from classmates, but also from the instructor. And that's where that instructor-led part comes into play and is so valuable. None of our other e-course platforms are going to have an instructor that you could actually converse with. Again, it's only through that discussion board, but if you have questions about class content, that's really a great feature. So Gale Courses, once you're here, you can just search for whatever topic it is you're interested in. Again, if you're interested in podcasting, we've got, here we go, blogging and podcasting for beginners. There it is. And you can see you do have start dates. This is a little bit more structured than any of our other e-courses. Got a set start and stop date, 6 weeks for each course. But yeah, you can be enrolled in as many as you want. And they're really a lot of fun. They're very easy to use. If you're interested in Gale Courses, I will also be including tomorrow a handout that kind of goes over some other features of it. We don't have tons of time today to like look at what a course looks like and all of that. So that handout will kind of explain some of the special features of Gale Courses. But yeah, I've taken this course. It's very good. Every Gale course I've taken pretty much has been excellent. So highly, highly recommended. And that's a good place to start. Like if you are completely brand new to podcasting and you just want a really good, solid entry-level course, that's a good one to go to, which is why we're talking about it right here at the beginning. We'll be looking at some more advanced courses as we keep going. But here's another entry-level one. And this is on a different platform. It's on LinkedIn Learning. If you are familiar at all with our e-courses, you may know that LinkedIn Learning is actually the new name for lynda.com. So if you've ever used lynda.com on our website, that's what LinkedIn Learning is. We just transitioned to the new name and the new website. The content is all still the same. And they have a class, another one of which I've taken, called Producing Podcasts. And this is going to kind of go over essentially the same things as the Gale course. Obviously, blogging is not a part of this one. So if you want blogging and podcasting, go with Gale Courses. If you just want something only on podcasting, Producing Podcasts from LinkedIn Learning is a good option. And the other thing about LinkedIn Learning, we're going to take a look at it now, is that it is very different from Gale courses. Gale courses had that set start and stop time, right? You had to register for whatever day of the month that your class started, and it's very structured. LinkedIn Learning is not like that at all. If we go here, we'll just have to click Get Started to actually see anything. We just log in with your card number. That is another change from lynda.com. You used to have to log in with a card number and a password. It is no longer a password that is required. It is just your card number and your PIN. Very easy. So we just click Continue, and we will be in LinkedIn. So here we go. We can search for podcast here, and we'll take a look at a little bit of look at what the difference is. So here we go. Producing podcasts. It is 1 hour and 42 minutes, which is kind of long, but that's not actually that bad. There's not too much of an investment if you're really wanting to get into podcasting. Again, I've taken this course. I've taken a lot of courses through LinkedIn Learning. They're fantastic, but you can kind of see when I started it, it's just a video. There is no instructor to talk to. There is no set start time or stop time. It is just you sitting learning from a video. So if you want that flexibility, then I would definitely go with LinkedIn Learning. So the Gale and LinkedIn just do similar things in a very different way. And LinkedIn Learning is going to have a lot more technology courses as well. They have a lot more just classes in general than Gale. So just know that we'll probably be talking about LinkedIn Learning quite a bit. One nice feature here is that you can actually just select whichever like chapter, I guess it would be, that you're interested in. So if you already know something about podcasting, you can also just come in here and choose whatever it is you're interested in learning. Also, you can see like that's like a beginner's level course, but if you want to keep learning, they've got even more that you can explore. Speaking confidently and effectively. That sounds like fun. So yeah, LinkedIn Learning. That is another one to definitely take a look at. All right, so here, basically what we're going to be looking at today are a lot of questions you're going to need to ask yourself. And again, this is one of the reasons why I'm giving you guys these slides tomorrow, because you might want to actually write these questions down and answer them as you think through, hey, what is my podcast actually going to look like? So yeah, one question you'd probably need to start with is, how long is my podcast going to run? Is it a single episode? I mean, most podcasts are a single episode, but if you just want to create an audio little broadcast on something, you can absolutely do that. Obviously, you're not going to get people listening to that consistently because it's one episode, but you kind of want to know what direction you're going in. Most people are going to go with either a short series or a podcast with no defined end, okay? So a short series is going to be good if you have some kind of arc, some narrative arc in your idea. Maybe it's actually a story podcast. You are literally telling a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Maybe you're exploring a very specific topic and you know, hey, when I get to this point, we're going to stop. Like maybe you're going through all of the battles of the Civil War. And so once you've done all the battles of the Civil War, the podcast is effectively over unless you choose to explore something else. But a lot of people I've noticed just do something with no defined end. And there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of people will just pick a topic and you can explore those topics forever. Like I study history, especially food history. You will never run out of ideas with most topics in the world. Like you can talk about them forever. So most people are going to go with the no defined end. It's just good to know that when you're getting into things. Again, there's no right or wrong answers with these. It's just exploring, hey, what's this going to look like? So yeah, the last 2 points, some people do actually tell a narrative, and then some people do informative podcasts. Either way, it doesn't matter. You just need to know where you're going with it. And kind of here's a little bit more follow-up for that. in general, the more frequently you update, the shorter your podcast can be. So less frequent updates, typically longer. So what does that mean? Okay, you also need to think about how many episodes are going to come out and when. Are you going to be doing an episode a day? Some people do that. If they do an episode a day, their podcasts are generally going to be short, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 15, maybe a half hour, but it's not going to be a 3-hour podcast coming out every day. That's too much content. It will rapidly overwhelm the listeners. If you're releasing a podcast a week or every other week or even a month, you can generally go longer because you're giving people more content to be digested over a longer period of time. And then kind of like the final question here is, do your podcasts all have the same length or will they vary? Again, some people, there's no right or wrong answer. Some people will say, hey, I'm doing a half-hour podcast. Every Friday, I release a half-hour podcast on whatever topic, and that's what I'm going to do. Other people will say, I'm just going to talk about whatever, and however long it takes, that's how long the podcast is. So it just depends. Do you want to go with a very structured format or a very loose format? Totally up to you. Okay, so there are some actually serious questions you need to ask before you get into this. One of which is, do I actually have the time to commit to this? Podcasting is not, like, it can be a hobby, but it's a time-consuming hobby. And it does cost money. Again, we will be talking about that. It is not completely free. You may be able to figure out how to make it completely free, but from what I can tell, that's pretty difficult. Podcasting is kind of like starting, if you're going into this like seriously, it is kind of like having a small business. Like, you have to plan, you have to put some money into it, you have to invest. Like, there's more going into this than just, hey, podcasting is cool and I want to make one. But that being said, it is a really cool way to share ideas and information with other people. It's wonderfully creative. There is so much you can learn when it comes to creating podcasts that you can use in many areas of your life. So just be aware, time, money, those are going to be an investment, but often a worthwhile one. Okay, I am going to go on ahead and pause now. I'm going to open up the chat. And okay, here we go. So if you do have a question, and I'm going to leave it open for a while and just keep an eye on it while I continue to talk. If you have any questions, you can go on ahead and enter those in the chat, and I'll keep an eye out for that. So yeah, those were some kind of initial questions you're going to need to ask yourself when it comes to just even thinking about getting into podcasting at all. We're going to talk now about the actual process of creating your podcast. And this is a very involved process. Mostly, this is kind of thinking about the idea, okay? And basically, this is kind of the formula for a podcast. You need a thing, an angle, time, and then you can create a podcast. And we're going to kind of break that down a bit. So podcasts, whether it's a narrative or whether it's just informative, they are all a story, okay? So ask yourself, what kind of story do I have to tell? Do you have an interest or a hobby that you want to teach others about? A personal experience you want to share? A story that you've just been dying to tell and you think, hey, maybe this is a great medium for that. It doesn't matter what it is. If there is something you're interested in, and I believe that there's something everyone's interested in, you can definitely turn that into a podcast. Just make sure it's something you really enjoy and that you want to share with others. So here's another question. What style are you going to use? And this is really important because the style you're going to use is going to influence the story you tell, okay? And basically, what do I mean by style? Well, okay, are you going to be doing an interview style? Maybe you're going to sit down with people from your high school and it's been like, I don't know, however many years since you graduated, and you want to see where they all are today. And that's your plan. You're going to go through a yearbook or whatever and interview all the people in it. Okay, you're going to go with interview style, right? There are a lot of really cool things you can do with interviews. You can also do a solo podcast. Again, that's a pretty common one. Just one person talking about what they know, what they're interested in, what information or knowledge they have to share. That's very, very common. I would say, at least with the podcasts that I listen to, there is often more than one host, usually like two, sometimes even three. And a lot of the podcast is just them playing off of each other. So if you're planning on podcasting with one or more co-hosts, you obviously need to be including them in all of the preparation, all of the planning, all of these discussions. So if that's the way you're going, feel free to share the PDF with them because they might need to take a look at it. Might give them some ideas as well. You have to work very closely with a co-host. And then hybrid can be some combination of the above types. And you can really play with these things. Like if you're telling just a straight story, maybe you want to do it solo, kind of almost like an audiobook. Maybe you want to have more than one person narrating. You can jump back and forth between the two. So that would be a hybrid style. Okay, now the story, creating your story. So you may have an idea already of what you're going to do with your podcast or what you would like to do with your podcast. And in that case, you're going to need to somehow write that down in a very, very short, pithy sentence that explains this is what I am doing, okay? And the reason for that is, it's going to give you direction. One of the dangers that comes with podcasting, especially I would say probably solo podcasting, since it's just you and your ideas, is you can kind of lose focus. You can kind of end up all over the place. Whereas creating something like a focus sentence is going to make you, concentrate on that thing, which is actually good, because if someone finds your podcast and they like the premise of it, they're going to want you to stick with that. They're not going to want you to be all over the place. What is a focus sentence? So it's someone does something because of something, and we're going to kind of flush that out a bit. Or you can use the XY story formula. So I'm doing a story about X, and what's interesting about it is Y. So I create, the focus sentence is, again, someone, that's the protagonist. And the protagonist can be you, you, the narrator, you, the podcaster. If you're talking about something you're interested in, you are technically the protagonist of your podcast. It's named even, and that goes like I'm talking about, even if it's not a story or narrative podcast. So someone does something, an action, because of a motivation, but there's a conflict. And this focus sentence is going to give a lot of structure, and it's very interesting to play with. So this is my idea. This is actually something, if I did do a podcast, this is what I would be doing. I don't have time right now, maybe one day. So I recreate historical recipes because cooking connects people through the ages, but I'm not very good at it, and the results can be hilarious. So you can see there, that's the entire premise of a podcast in one sentence. And it's got all of these parts: the protagonist, the action, the motivation, and the conflict. And that's going to be a good story. The XY story formula is I'm doing a story about X, which can be anything you want. And what's interesting about it is Y. So something interesting, surprising, and or unexpected to the audience. And this is a really good one to use, especially if you're going kind of that factual or non-narrative way, because again, what's interesting that you're sharing with the world, and why would someone find that interesting? So this is just a silly idea. I'm doing a story about the pop culture of the 90s, and what's interesting about it is that I lived through the 90s basically off the grid and have no idea who the Fresh Prince is, so I'm discovering this all for the first time. There you go. There is a story, the XY story formula written out. So again, when you get these PDFs, try and write out whatever story, whatever podcast idea you're having in this formula, and just kind of see where it goes. Okay, Any questions right now? I'm not seeing any in the chat. Let me just make sure. Okay, good. It is still open, so I'll just keep that open for a while. Okay, so storytelling tips. These are just some more things to kind of chew over. So how is your story interesting to other people? Again, the two formulas that we already looked at, those basically address that. How is it going to matter to them, and what are they going to take away? Often what people are going to take away with podcasts, it's usually entertainment or information. So which one of the, or a combination of the two, which one of those are you wanting people to actually leave with? You need to give people basically a reason for listening to you. You can't not give them anything. But podcasting is such a big world that even if you're talking about a pretty obscure topic, there will almost always be people who will be interested in that topic. Okay, so kind of I'm talking a lot about story, a lot about how to structure story, but there's obviously a ton more. So another class, and actually this is a bunch of different courses. If you're interested in creative writing, Gale Courses actually has a ton of classes on writing. They're all excellent. I've taken many of them. So like writing essentials, writing fiction like a pro. So if you want to do a storytelling podcast, writing for children, if you want to do one of, for children, travel writing. Hey, hopefully that'll be a thing again. If you want to do a travel podcast, okay, maybe take the travel writing, write your life story. All of these, there's so many different options when it comes to creative writing classes in Gale Courses. I highly recommend taking one if you have any interest at all in that topic. And again, whether you're doing a fiction or a nonfiction podcast, you're going to learn a lot about writing and storytelling from these classes. So they are quite valuable. Okay, now we've kind of talked about the idea of the podcast, why you would do it, what you're going to do it about. Now, how are you going to brand it? Remember I said starting a podcast is kind of like starting a small business? Well, part of that is marketing and branding. So how are we going to do this? First of all, the title of your podcast is actually really important. That being said, don't get too fancy with it. Like, don't name your podcast something that if it is not obvious, basically. So like the first point says here, your title should clearly communicate what your podcast is about. It should not leave people guessing at all. And then also you're going to want to write something called a hook, which is a short description that goes with the podcast name. Now, if you have done either of those two formulas, the XY one, or I'm blanking on what the other one is called, but either of the formulas we talked about, you kind of have already written your hook. So if you're going through this in order as you plan your podcast out, you actually already have that figured out. The title, you might have to put a little more thought into. And yeah, the last point here, definitely. So this is something you can just do is go up to someone and say, hey, there's a podcast called, and then tell them the title you're thinking of, naming your podcast, and see and ask them, hey, what do you think this show is about based just on the title alone, and see what they say. Okay, that title needs to be evocative enough that when you just say the title, someone can get pretty close to what your podcast is actually about. Artwork. So artwork is actually important for a podcast because no matter where you distribute it, unless you just put it on YouTube, which we'll talk about later, you will need an image associated with your podcast, a logo, a photo, some kind of promotional artwork. And the title and the artwork are so important because that's primarily what people are going to be seeing when they browse for new podcasts to listen to. So the title and the artwork really need to grab somebody. And then, yeah, the point, it needs to be legible at multiple sizes. You do need it to, it needs to look good, really tiny on someone's iPod or really big on your blog or your website. So just keep that in mind. You will need to create artwork, or, and this is again, you may need to start spending money. You may need to pay a graphic designer or an artist to create it for you. It doesn't need to be complicated. Like there are lots of places where you can go to create logos and design things for free. It just needs to look intriguing, okay? And then the description. So this is going to be a longer version of either of those two formulas we talked about. It can be a couple sentences long, basically a clear, concise, and informative description of what the podcast is actually about. And this is really important, you're going to want to include relevant keywords to increase search engine optimization. So let's use my historical cooking podcast as an example. I would definitely want to include the words food, history, and cooking somewhere in that description, because people who are interested in any of those topics, I would want them to see my podcast in the list of potential podcasts to listen to. So one thing you can do is write, like kind of pull out a sheet of paper, open up a computer document, and type out 3 to 5 keywords that describe your podcast. And you probably will want to include those in this description. And make sure they're like concrete things, not like interesting or something like that, like actually, what is it about? And then, yeah, you can go into more detail here about what you do and why you do it, and when the podcast comes out, and if you have a co-host, talk about each other or whatever. So you can have a little more fun with this. It still should be fairly short, but again, more flexibility than just the little blurb. Okay, so tips from the pros. When it actually comes to launching, it's a good idea to launch with at least 3 episodes. And the reason for that is that one episode, first of all, people don't know that you're going to make a second one. A lot of people will start a project and not continue with it. So that can be a problem. So they are not as likely to trust you at this point. If you release with 3 episodes, you're showing, hey, I put in the work. I make sure that things get out. And also that gives them enough content to get hooked on whatever concept you're doing. They can get familiar with your personality. They can decide, hey, do I like this or do I not? You're going to want to keep your episode numbering simple with whatever you decide. Season 1, episode 12, just spelling out episode and then the number, doesn't matter. You need to think about that before you even start creating the podcast, because you need to be consistent with this. You probably are going to want to make a branded email address. A lot of podcasters will have their email address with usually the title of their podcast or their own name as a way for people to reach out to them with questions, just for information and all of that. You're going to want to start strong and on topic. That kind of goes to like building that confidence with those 3 episodes. And you might want to consider reserving social accounts with your brand. So Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all of that kind of thing. And do that even if you're not initially planning on using those platforms. The reason for that being that you may want to use them in the future. Like, let's say you're just starting out super small with your podcast, and then it kind of starts taking off. Well, you don't want someone else to have already grabbed the Twitter handle for your podcast, because you might want that actually to promote what you're doing. So grab those things early. And it's kind of the same thing with the email address. You want to get that from the beginning. Whether or not you end up using it extensively doesn't matter. It's just a good thing to have. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the actual process of recording your podcast. And this is where things get a little technical. A lot of what we've been talking about so far has been very much like theoretical, planning things out. But what do you actually need to do to create the content, the actual audio for your podcast? Well, first thing, what do you need? You're going to need a microphone. That's pretty basic, right? You can have one built in, your laptop, your desktop, your phone, iPad, whatever. Those all have a built-in microphone that you can use. Built-in microphones tend to not be as high quality as an external microphone. So an external microphone would be something you plug in, again, whether to your laptop or your mobile device or your your desktop. I mean, it doesn't matter. An external mic the external mics are usually better quality, not always. Like you can absolutely use your phone. So many people use their phone to record and have wonderful audio. So if you already have that and you're looking to start cheap, you can absolutely start with your phone. And actually, I've got here 2 recommended voice recorders, whether for Apple or for Android. Voice Record Pro for Apple devices, and then Voice Recorder by Lavcara for Android. There are others out there. These are just 2 that I've seen recommended before by podcasters. And it's just, an app you put on your phone and then you can record into that. Now, if you are willing to put a little bit of investment into your podcast right from the beginning, you may want to consider buying an external mic. Now I record videos for work and for school, and I used to use a built-in. I then moved on to like a clip-on lavalier mic, like a lapel mic. And then finally I bought like a full external microphone. So I've kind of gone through that process over the years of finally getting to, the big, nice microphone. And how much they cost can really vary. They can be like $50. They can run into the hundreds of dollars. Like choose one that fits with your budget. Okay, and then the last 3 words here, omnidirectional, bidirectional, or unidirectional. What does that even mean? Well, if you're getting an external mic, you are going to want to consider what microphone style it is, okay? And that's what these 3 words are. Omnidirectional picks up sound from everywhere. So if you are recording somewhere and you want the sound from literally all around the microphone, you would go with an omnidirectional mic. This isn't super common. If you're like recording an orchestra or something, they may have something like this. It's most people aren't going to use omnidirectional for a podcast. They're more likely going to use bidirectional or unidirectional. And as you can see here, bidirectional goes 2 ways. It'll pick up the sound in 2 opposite directions. That's great for if you're doing interview style, or if you are you have a co-host. That way you can both get picked up by it. And then unidirectional, this is great if you are just recording solo. It's only going to pick up really in one direction. So pay attention if you are buying an external mic to which one of these it is. Some microphones actually can switch between these different modes. And there are more microphone styles. We're just not going to get into it. These are the 3 most common. So keep that in mind. Hopefully this little graphic will help you if you decide to actually buy an external mic. Okay, so working with a cheap microphone, because again, we don't necessarily want to spend tons of money right off the bat all the time. So working with a cheap microphone, and you can include the phone microphone in this. Again, a lot of them are pretty high quality, but it's still not going to be as good as a studio mic. So don't talk too far away from the microphone, because that's going to catch more room noise and make it harder to hear you. The closer you are to the mic, the more it's going to pick up your voice and the less it's going to pick up everything else. That being said, don't talk too close to the microphone. So that will result in plosives and clipping audio. So a plosive is when you kind of hear your breath kind of pop in the microphone. And one thing you can do to kind of avoid this is use something called a pop filter. And a pop filter, it just looks like this. It's something you can attach to your microphone. I think there are ones specifically for your phone as well. And then it's got this little grid here, a little mesh, and that makes it so it doesn't catch those plosives. So those are really cheap. Those are like, you can get them for a couple bucks. So that's a pretty low investment, and it removes a really annoying sound when it comes to recording. Because let's be honest, bad audio can kill a good podcast. And then the last thing, don't touch the microphone while you're recording. Kind of goes without saying, it will pick up the sound. Okay, you've got your microphone. Well, where are you going to actually record this? You need to pick as quiet a space as humanly possible. whatever that looks like. I know a lot of people actually record in their closet. If you have a walk-in closet and you can close the door, that's probably the quietest place in your house. Even people without a walk-in closet will do this sometimes. They'll kind of like shove a chair in there, just because it's closed in, it's quiet. There is a lot of clothing and fabric that's going to dampen any other sounds. So closet is a pretty nice option. If you have your computer present while you are recording, keep the microphone well away from that computer fan because it will pick up that sound. And then ask yourself, just kind of explore your house, your office, wherever you're going to do this, and ask yourself, sit down, listen. Can you hear people, the air conditioner, office equipment, anything at all? If it's noticeable, you may want to consider recording somewhere else. Obviously, it's very difficult to minimize all noise, but starting with a quiet place will help you not have to deal with too much. So, recording tips. So when you actually sit down to record, definitely be conversational. Do not sound like you're reading a speech. Do not get nervous. This is not public speaking. There's nothing to be nervous about. Talk like you're talking to a friend. I mean, if you're reading a speech and that's what it sounds like, people will pick up on that, and people are not really going to go for that. Don't talk too quickly or slowly. This is something I struggle with. I get excited when I'm doing presentations or talking about things I'm interested in, and I tend to talk too quickly, which can be hard for people to keep up with. If you talk too slow, people are going to get bored. So find that nice medium. Talk loud enough, but not too loud. You do not want to be yelling into your microphone. And be aware of those filler words that slip in, like and so. A lot of times, if you record a podcast, you will not be audio editing it. Maybe a little bit, but you don't necessarily want to be going in and taking out every single or so or like or whatever it is that you fill your speech with. If you have a lot of those, it can be a real pain if you decide to edit those out. A few of them is fine. That's part of being conversational, right? We all do this. But be aware of it and try and minimize it as much as possible. And then finally, have fun while you're talking. Smile. Your enthusiasm is going to show. I've also heard actually standing while you record helps the quality of your voice as well. So smiling, standing, having fun, just enjoying it. All of these things are going to come across. It's going to affect the quality of your voice, and it's going to make a better recording. Okay, now editing your podcast. So like I said, you may be audio editing it. If you can do your entire audio in one take, first of all, you are amazing. I've never been able to do that. And you will probably end up doing some editing. How much editing you end up doing can really vary. You can be very flexible with this. You can do very minimal editing. Just maybe if you had a huge gap, you said something completely wrong or stumbled over your words and you want to cut that out. Okay, great. Some people will go through and edit, everything to make sure it's all of those ums are taken out. The sound is perfect throughout the entire thing. It's entirely up to you how much effort you put into editing your podcast. So there are free softwares for audio editing. You may end up going with a free one. That's usually what I would recommend starting with, because while you may need to put some money into podcasting, you don't want to put too much, especially if you're just starting out and it's just a hobby or something you're interested in. You want to see how it turns out before you start putting big bucks into audio software programs. So 2 options for software: Audacity for Windows and GarageBand for Mac. Both of those are multi-track audio editing softwares. So you can actually use them to, like you could have music and your voice and other sound effects on top of it and have those different layers of sound in your podcast. Or if you just want to have your voice, just the one audio track, because you don't want to mess around with multiple tracks, because that sounds way too much, that's fine. That'll work with this too. I have used, oh, you know what? Yeah, I think I've used Audacity. I've never had a Mac, so I've never used GarageBand, but I have heard that it's pretty easy to use. Well, all of these things do have a learning curve, but once you know how to edit audio, it looks scary, but it's not really. So, like I said, they're multi-track. You can have other sound effects. You can have music. Just know that there are lots of places you can go to get sounds, whether they're free or whether you have to pay for them. This is actually a mix, both of these. There are some free platforms and some that are not. So for example, for sound effects, free sound is, no surprises, actually free. So here, if you wanted to have some different sound effects in your podcast, you can absolutely get those from here. So example, a squeaky bedroom door being opened and closed, and you want to have that in the background. Maybe you've got like a horror podcast or something, I don't know. You could include that. So you just download the file, you put it into whatever audio software you're using, and you can just edit it into the podcast. So I'm not going to show all of these. The free music archive is pretty cool. Again, it's free. You are going to want to look for music that is like royalty free, or that you may have to pay for it. Do not just grab music off of the internet or off of your iPod and pop it into your podcast. Copyright is a thing, and you do not want to get involved in that. So all of these things, just make sure you read the details and find out, hey, can I use this for free, like genuinely? Do I need to attribute the creator? What do I need to do to use this so that I won't get into trouble? That is something you need to be aware of if you're including sound effects and music. I believe most of these that I've included, it's all either, again, free sounds, free music, or royalty-free sound effects and music. So you will need to take a closer look, but there's a lot out there if you want to add more to your podcast. And yeah, learning Audacity. If you want to learn how to use an audio software, an audio editing software like Audacity, something like LinkedIn Learning will literally walk you through every single step down to like downloading it, downloading is so easy. It is the easiest thing you will do when it comes to any of these platforms, but it will walk you through each step, which is super nice. Okay, distributing your podcast. So we've gone through the entire process of creation. We've brainstormed, we've bought our microphone, we've recorded, we've edited. Okay, now what? Well, now it comes to the distributing part. How do we even publish this? So you will need to download an MP3 encoder, and there's one linked right here. Basically, you need your file to be in the MP3 format. I do believe that's often an option in whatever audio software you're using, so you may not need the encoder, but you do need to get it in that MP3 format. And then you're going to need to save your file to a podcast host. And this podcast hosting, this is actually super important. It's one of the most important things. You actually need a website that hosts your media files, essentially. Podcasts are huge files. It is a lot of audio content. They're very, very large. And if you had your own website, yes, you could try and deliver your podcasts through your website, but often there is a limit to how much you can do that, and it can get very expensive. So you will usually use a host. They're going to actually have the media files on their servers or whatever they host it. It's there, and then you can share access out from there. I know that sounds a little complicated. It's actually not that complicated. A lot of these different places, there are a lot of different hosts. So like Blueberry, SoundCloud, Buzzsprout, Libsyn, Podbean, there are just tons. And you can go on ahead, and this is where you are going to need to spend some money. If you want to do a podcast host, this is, you're going to end up spending something. There are usually different options. They are going to walk you through all the steps of actually getting your podcast out there, which is really nice. I just picked Blueberry because it was the first one on the list, but all of these have different strengths. This is something that you will need to look into yourself. I will say, if you are going the as cheap as possible route, which I am totally on board with, Buzzsprout is actually free podcast hosting. So very well respected. You can go on ahead and get started for free. Now, let me just take a look quickly at the pricing. So you can, for free, you can upload 2 hours each month. So just keep that in mind. It is free, but there is a limit. So if you were planning on, releasing that 3-hour podcast once a week, this is not going to work. You may end up needing to pay some. So again, I haven't actually hosted or done any of this podcast hosting myself. I would probably start with Buzzsprout because, hey, free is pretty nice. But there are other options. Okay. So you can distribute your podcast. Most people are going to do streaming. So again, like if you have a mobile device, I have an iPod, for example, or an iPhone, you would maybe download the podcast app, Apple Podcasts, and that's where you would stream your podcast. You would just play it across the internet, or you are going to download the podcast from the RSS feed into a feed reader or podcast directory. What does that mean? Okay, basically what I said before, a podcast directory, I think I got it a little bit backwards. Streaming would not be the same thing. So podcast directories, let's talk about that for a bit. Podcast directories, that's what I was talking about before. So iTunes, Apple Podcasts or whatever, Stitcher, SoundCloud, YouTube, Spotify, there are podcasts on all of these. They're podcast directories. So you add your podcast to them, and then people will access your podcast from whichever of these platforms. And you can literally have your podcast on all of them. So like if I listen to the podcast Saber, I could get that on iTunes, I could get it on Stitcher, SoundCloud. I don't think it's on YouTube, Spotify. It'll be in all of the different places because different people use different podcast directories to find what they're looking for. So you want to be in all the places. So these are just some, and all of these actually do link to, I don't think that one does, but a lot of them will link to the actual page for like the podcast creator. So it'll explain to you, the podcaster, how to actually get added to the podcast directory. So, okay, RSS feeds. This is something you need to be aware of. It stands for really simple syndication. And this is what allows a web feed. So, okay, like let's use the podcast Saver as an example. They release their podcast, I'm going to make this up, every Wednesday afternoon. Well, it's always there, right? That updates are always available right away. That's because of this RSS. So if you want to distribute your podcast using a player or a podcast directory, such as iTunes, you will need to set up an RSS feed. And this is why having a host, a media host, one of those, like Podbean or whatever, they will do that for you. So you just need to know RSS exists. If you hear that flying around, that's what it does. That's kind of vaguely what it is. We're not going deep into it. Essentially, if you have a host, they will handle that for you, which is really nice because it can get quite complicated. Okay. Final thing, marketing your podcast. We kind of talked a little bit about this with the branding. That was more just like getting people hooked on the image, the title, the description. Once you've got everything pulled together and it's all been created, how do you market this thing? Well, first of all, you're going to market within the podcast itself. So often at the end of the podcast, you'll hear people saying, leave a review, subscribe, whatever. Look at my website, join my newsletter. Those are all examples of something called a call to action. And a call to action is basically exactly what it sounds like. It is asking your listeners to do an action, okay? And that is a form of marketing. You can also use a website, social media, and/or a newsletter to promote your podcast. That's up to you what channels you decide to go through. There are a lot of options. And then finally, this is actually just really simple. Be consistent with releasing episodes. Nothing is going to turn listeners away more than you not keeping up with your listening or your release schedule. It's basically breaking their trust. So if they're expecting you to be there every Wednesday afternoon with a podcast, and you suddenly aren't for whatever reason, even if it's a great reason for on your end of things, if you have not communicated to them why that has happened, they're not going to trust you anymore. They're going to be very quick to delete that podcast from their list. The fact is there are thousands and thousands of podcasts. You do not want to give people any reason to get rid of yours. So if for some reason you do need to miss an episode, something really terrible happens, you're just too busy, you need to communicate that somehow. At the end of whatever the last podcast you do, you need to say, hey, just so you know, we're missing next week. So just be aware, whatever. Say it on your social media. That's actually marketing. You are building your brand. You are building trust with your listeners. So that's a pretty simple thing to do. And social media marketing. Social media can be quite a bit. LinkedIn Learning is your friend when it comes to social media marketing. They have a lot of classes. This is one social media marketing foundations that actually breaks down all of these different social media platforms and explains the differences between them, how to use them, how to optimize them so you're getting the word out. It's a really good overview. But let's say you know for a fact you just want to use Instagram and Twitter. You can also just search LinkedIn Learning for Instagram or Twitter or whatever platform you're interested in, and there will be courses on that specific social media platform as well. So if that's something you do decide to go into, LinkedIn Learning will be a really great place to go. Okay, so another thing you can do is actually monetize your podcast. Again, you probably will be spending some money along the way, microphones, hosting, whatever, but you can potentially also make money off of your podcast. This usually takes a while before it actually, takes a while before a podcast is profitable. And even then, you will most likely not be quitting your day job to become a full-time podcaster. But there are things you can do to monetize your podcast. So sponsorships, if you've ever watched people on YouTube and they talk about Audible, that's a big one. Sponsorships like that, like you can actually sign up to be an affiliate of Audible, which is one of the reasons why it's so popular. And then you refer people to them, usually with a discount code of some kind. You can also do very traditional route of selling advertising space on your podcast. And I did forget to check this. There used to be a website where you could actually advertise free space, or you could advertise space on your podcast that people could pay you to get that advertising slot. That was not the most eloquently said thing, but yeah, it used to be a site, and I used to have a link to it here. So I will try and find that and send it with the information tomorrow. Sell your services. So let's say you're doing an informational podcast. Maybe you're doing it on how to flip a house, or some skill or something interesting that people want to know about. You can sell more information. A lot of times people will also have like a book, an ebook, a course, an online course that they'll sell. And you can advertise that through your podcast and hopefully get more people going towards whatever it is, a service, a product that you have created. Listener donations, you can have a Patreon, for example, where people will just give you money each month to do whatever. And then there are a bunch of other ideas here. I did just look at the time. We're actually done. Wow, look at that. I will hang around for a little bit if people have questions, but just kind of to wrap it up. That was a ton of information. I'm well aware of that. Hopefully you if you're totally new to podcasting, you have a better idea of what steps you're going to need to take. And definitely, I hope you know that there are really fantastic resources in terms of library e-courses that you can use to help you on your way. And just know you can always contact the library as well. We've got a phone number, an email. You can chat us on the research page or on the contact us page. And we also do like virtual book a librarian appointments where you sit down one-on-one with a reference librarian and we help you with whatever it is you're interested in. We will show you the resources that the library has to offer you with whatever it is you're trying to do. So that all being said, we are done. Again, if you do have questions, the chat is still open. Oh, I've got one from Beth. I'm sorry, I did not see that. Are any legal copyright considerations when creating titles, logo, content, or where to learn about that? Ooh, that's a good one. So yes, you do not take things from other people. Like, you know, basically I'm a librarian. I can't offer any legal advice. When it comes to creating titles, logo, and content, you know what I would recommend? There is actually, because this might fall under this category, there is a group called the Volunteer Lawyers and Accountants for the Arts. They used to have pretty regular classes on copyright law for creators. And I have not checked them since everything happened this past year. So I don't know if they're offering those classes virtually or if they're planning on offering them in person again. I'll take a look into that and I will give you that information in the follow-up email. And I will also take a look. We may have some classes in Gail or Linda on that topic. I just have absolutely no confidence in saying anything about copyright or legal issues. So I'll see what resources I can find to help you. All right, and then Kristen, is there a specific time frame that you recommend for a podcast episode? Again, it really does depend a lot on, first of all, what you're interested in investing time-wise. And then also, how often are you releasing that podcast? If you're releasing every day, again, it can be really short. It can be like even 15 minutes, 10, 15 minutes. If you are doing it maybe like once a week, once every other week, you might be wanting to go up to an hour. Once a month, maybe you want to go like 2 hours. That's up to you. I think one way to kind of think about it is think about what podcasts you like to listen to and look at how long they are. Because, you know, short attention span is a thing. Kind of see what are you comfortable with, what are you interested in, and kind of use that as a guideline. So I hope that answers the question. Again, you will have my email after tomorrow when I send out that PDF. So feel free to reach out to me directly and I'll try and answer whatever questions you have. Okay. All right, so I am going to go on ahead and I'm going to shut off the program. Again, feel free to reach out to me. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate you all being here and I hope you learned something new. Have a good evening. Oh, really quickly, got a question. Is the recording available afterwards? Yes, it will be going up on the YouTube. So yes, you're good to go, Kristen. All right, have a good night all. Bye.